All right, so we're here with Jordan and Raymond. Please tell us about yourself.
Well, I am a graduate student in the Hyperlab. I am pursuing a master's degree and I am in my last year, so woo, almost done. I've worked in the Hyperlab for 3-ish years now. I joined as an undergrad after taking thermo with Jake. And I'm currently working on the mobile hydrogen generation unit project. I'm designing a novel heat exchanger for the liquefier portion, basically based on entropy minimization. So it looks like kind of like a piece of coral almost. It has a branching structure. So stay tuned. That'll be done in 3 months-ish.
Perfect. So what does your typical day at Hyper look like?
My typical day varies a lot depending on what's going on, because definitely go through phases of doing more background research and then actually designing and then actually implementing. So right now I'm very much in the design phase. So most of my days are spent doing code and looking at thermal modeling. So not the most thrilling thing, but most of my days right now are coding and doing a lot of meetings, just because I'm running a team of undergrads and as well as I'm on a larger team of people. So just trying to stay coordinated, especially with COVID going on. More exciting times when I'm actually building something. I spend the whole day at the outdoor site. So actually hands-on soldering, all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. What's your favorite thing about working at Hyper?
I really enjoy the autonomy that Jake gives us. I know a lot of other labs, they're structured and kind of isolated. So grad students work on a project by themselves in their cubicle type of thing. Whereas Hyper is not at all like that. So we have projects that are actually relevant to industry rather than just for a paper. And it's much more of a community aspect. And as long as we do what we're supposed to be doing, and we're trusted to do so, we have full autonomy to do as we see fit. So it's a much more like well-rounded experience, in my opinion.
Like you said about working in the industry and actually working on things that are relevant, what are you hoping to achieve in Hyper?
I'm hoping, so after this, I really want to go into hydrogen industry in terms of transportation and making that publicly available. And so my goal with Hyper is to just have a way to get into that sector. I've always been really interested in renewables, and I actually started undergrad as a bioengineer looking at algae biofuels. And well, I was double majoring in bioengineering and mechanical engineering. Bioengineering didn't want to do the medical thing, so ended up in mechanical. I realized there were renewables there as well. So I want to go into renewables and hydrogen, and this is the best way to do it, considering there's only 3 cryo labs in the country. So yeah, I'm here for the opportunity.
Awesome. So it is said that FAIL stands for first attempt in learning. Have you ever encountered an experience at Hyper that supports this idea?
I think that every experience, for the most part, supports the idea, and not in a bad way though. Just that, I mean, you go through school and you never do like real projects, right? And so it's hard to get hands-on experience. And then cryo is something you're not taught, and there are so many different rules in the field that are very specific. And if you don't consider all of them, everything will go wrong. So, I mean, on my undergrad project, I was looking at increasing oxygen purity in a gaseous air mixture. And I mean, we had to cool the inlet temperature to a specific amount in order to liquefy the oxygen in the system. And I don't know how many times I did that wrong. And I didn't reach the right temperature because I didn't understand what the saturation temperature really was, because it was a mixture and there were different components. And then I got all these samples analyzed and they all came back duds. So eventually I got it working and I got it figured out, but there's definitely a learning curve. Especially, I mean, this last project I was doing, I had to solder a bunch of temperature sensors and heater wires and all that kind of stuff out of the dewar into a pinout, through conduit, into another pinout, and then into a lakeshore to actually read the measurements. I didn't know what any of that was. And Oh gosh, all of the temperature sensors in the first round broke when we moved the system. They all snapped. And so this last summer, I had to go through and completely redesign the whole temperature rate system that we were using, and remount everything and resolder everything. And now it works. So yay, congrats. Yeah, thankfully. We'll see. They're actually liquefying this weekend. So I hope everything holds up.
Do you find it easier to troubleshoot as being a leader, or how has your experience been being a leader and seeing possibly some of the people working under you possibly fail?
Um, I think being the lead definitely comes with more knowledge, which makes troubleshooting a lot easier. I think there's like that definitely like a critical level of knowledge that you need to have to successfully perform on a project. It's like you don't know what you don't know type of thing. Um, I think it's been really rewarding to be leading a group. This is my second group of undergrads right now. My other one's all retired or graduated and left me. Not retired, they're not that old. Um, but there's definitely value to teaching someone something and having to go through it all again myself and realizing I forgot all of these things because I hadn't used them for a while. Um, yeah, troubleshooting is definitely easier, but I'd say it's almost more valuable going back and doing it the second time with teaching someone else.
So just to reiterate on what you just said, do you find it valuable to work with undergrads?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I can elaborate, but um, yeah, I mean, when I was an undergrad and I joined the lab, it was much smaller. There were fewer than 10 people in the lab. Now we have upwards of 40 almost. It's insane. So when I joined, very, very small. I worked basically by myself. And then I was given one grad student, Carl, who's still in the lab, graduating this year. He was kind of my mentor, as in he helped me with the building aspect of things, because I didn't know what compression versus like NPT fittings were. Um, but there was no like team aspect to it. And for me, I would have worked better if I was in a group of people. So now, like having a group of undergrads and being able to help them actively hands-on in a way that I didn't get just because there weren't resources at the time, I find very valuable to try to give them more of a head start almost, kind of like learning off of what I went through and then trying to improve as much as I can off of that.
Very nice. If you could speak to anyone from recorded history, who would it be and why?
I had to think about that. I decided that I would want to speak to the first US astronaut team that went into space because seeing real engineering and how much approximation goes into it and how much you decide that, well, this is as close as I'm going to get. I really want to know what was going through their heads when they decided to get on, like to go on this mission and go into space. I would be terrified. I don't think I would do it. But I want to know how they found the trust in the engineering team to launch into space. I want to know their thought process.
That's great. You kind of already touched on this, but due to the pandemic, how have you been handling your lab work during this time?
So most of my lab work is online anyway, so that hasn't really changed. Spent most of my time coding before COVID, so still here, still doing the same code. Lot more Zoom meetings though. I'm not a fan of Zoom meetings. I like meeting in person a lot more, as I'm sure everyone for the most part would agree. I don't know. I think I have like 4 meetings today, and that's pretty consistent for most of the days. So there's definitely added challenges with staying in touch because I have this new undergrad team. I hired them on this year. I've met them in person once to give them a tour of the outdoor site. So I don't have that same level of familiarity with them that I had with my last team. So need a lot more Zoom calls to actually like get to know each other and then actually stay in touch and make sure they know what's going on, because it's just not harder for them to reach me because I mean everyone's always at their computer, but there's that kind of like social boundary if they don't know me, so it'd be kind of awkward to ask questions despite encouragement. So yeah, a lot of Zoom calls, lots and lots of Zoom calls.
So talking about your other graduates, are all of you pretty close together? You talked about your mentor, Carl, still kind of being in the lab and just also working with your past undergrad groups. Are you all pretty familiar with one another, unless in the case of Zoom?
Yeah, there are a few new grad students this year that I do not know as well because I haven't, they're on different projects and I haven't had the chance to meet them in person. Like the grad offices are 2 rooms, so we all get really close in non-COVID times. Yeah, I mean, I'm really close with all the other grad students. We, as I mentioned, worked like 5 feet from each other, which was both a blessing and a curse. Had a lot of really interesting conversations, maybe wasted a little bit of time. Not waste, it was put to good use, but was not productive, let's say. And we used to have like lab meetings or lab lunches every Fridays, where every Friday, where all the grad students would go out to Zoe's and not bring work and just hang out. We used to have potlucks and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I mean, there's only one other grad student. I guess he's a postdoc, so I don't know if that counts, but only one other grad student on my project. So we're really close. We get to interact all the time. But yeah, I think everyone in the lab in general is just really nice. So as long as you can actually have time to speak to them, you will become friends. As far as the undergrads, the ones that I got to work with for outside of COVID times, because COVID interrupted some of that too. I mean, I think we're definitely close. I've written letters of rec for them, so that counts for something. I mean, we didn't like go and hang out or anything, but we definitely chatted, and I'm still in contact with a few of them and just checking in on what they're doing. So, yeah.
That's awesome. So just learning, like going from like right when you heard about Hyper, going through the interviews, joining Hyper, and now you've been in here for 3 years. How has Hyper kind of, I don't know, become more professionalized? Like you've said the lab has grown immensely.
Yeah.
Has it helped you in your professional field going forward?
The lab growing?
Uh, just your time in the lab.
Um, yeah, I mean, so when I joined the lab, I didn't actually have to interview. I didn't even ask to join the lab. I was asking to join a club that was run out of the lab called Innovation for Sustainable Energy, which doesn't even exist anymore. Yeah, I messaged Jake and I was like, hey, can I like join this thing? Because he was running it. And he's like, well, no, but you can join the lab if you want. It's like, cool. I guess that sounds like an okay thing to do. I didn't know anything. I'd say that being in Hyper though has definitely helped with professional development. I mean, you don't get to experience this now because COVID, which is coming up a lot. But we used to have a bunch of industry tours coming through. October, we would have space days. So a bunch of the Washington space companies, as well as some California ones, would have come through, done more personalized tours and interviews and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know how many tours I've organized and helped lead and just learn how to deliver information in a very efficient, concise way that's relevant to your audience. I mean, I should have thought about that before, but I don't think when you speak to someone, you really like that's not at the forefront of your mind most of the time. You just kind of ramble like I'm doing now. Um, so yeah, it's given me the opportunity to meet and interact with a lot more professionals that I would have otherwise. And Jake's also really good at putting an emphasis on professionalism and just making you aware of what you're doing and how you could be better at it. And then over a long enough time, you actually get positive change. So yeah, I don't think I would have gotten this experience elsewhere. So I've learned a lot with engineering. I've also learned a lot just hopefully so I can succeed in the field.
So again, you've already touched on this. I mean, you're blowing through our questions. What is your most interesting kind of experience that you've had in Hyper, whether it be funny with graduate students or just a mix up that just ended with something that you can laugh at later?
Yeah. we've had many funny opportunities with the grad students, mostly at parties, so probably not best to talk about here. But um, most interesting thing that happened to me was as an undergrad, and it was not interesting at the time. I was terrified. Um, but when I was doing the enriched oxygen mixtures, um, industry wanted us, because this was, oh gosh, who was sponsoring this? I don't remember who was sponsoring it. It's not important. They wanted us to look at argon oxygen mixtures. And so I had my setup for my oxygen nitrogen mixtures for air. So we just hooked it up to run the argon oxygen, and it was a heat exchanger. There's a pre-cooling system. So a heat exchanger was in a bath of liquid nitrogen, so that I could reach about, I believe it was a little less than 80 Kelvin before the inlet to my actual system. And turns out the triple point of argon is right around liquid nitrogen temperatures. So we froze it, like froze the heat exchanger solid with argon. And I didn't even think about this because I always considered nitrogen as having like the highest liquefaction temperature or liquid temperature. So I didn't think it would be an issue. But no, we froze the whole thing full of argon, and then it started pressurizing and heating up, which meant that it was rapidly converting from solid to gas and just like massive pressure bursts within the system. And the whole thing was sealed. We had it all set up with the pressure relief valves and everything else, so it ended up being okay, and we managed the situation. And I didn't check this by people, and no one caught it. But it was terrifying. There was just loud pinging in this copper tubing, and I thought it was going to explode. I thought we were done for, but it's all good. It all worked out.
Thank goodness. What would you, just to finish up, what would you give as a piece of advice to a person who's wanting to join Hyper? What should they be looking forward to?
You know, I think that when you join Hyper, you get to look forward to a lot of growth, really new, relevant opportunities, and so much confusion. Just because I mean, cryo is such a unique thing that has its own rules, like I mentioned before, that if you are not willing to mess up many times and ask a lot of questions and I don't know, repeat the same process so many times because you missed that one little assumption you should have made, probably not going to make it. But if you're willing to push through and it's a really good learning opportunity, then you get all the really unique, rewarding experiences, and you get to make all those connections with everyone else. And I mean, where else are you going to be able to experience this? So if you can do it, I would say to do it. Because even if you don't go into cryo, you still have a really knowledgeable base and you have a good network of people.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Like, this is the best. So thank you so much for talking with all of us.